is currently at work on another massive volume on the history of how North Vietnam won the war. Let us welcome J.B.
This is the mother of invention, okay? Can you hear me okay? All right. So, laser pointer doesn't work, so I got to use this, right? So all you young kids not paying attention to the front, I'm going to be watching you very closely, okay? All right. All right, so what we're going to do is spend the next 35, 40 minutes talking about not only the 1975 campaign that conquered South Vietnam, but looking a little bit at 55, events in 65, 68, 72, similarities, dissimilarities to those, and sort of why the South collapsed so quickly, all right? And I want you to understand a couple of things before we get too far down this path, is that unfortunately, because South Vietnam collapsed so quickly and appeared to collapse so quickly, it sort of cemented this image of South Vietnam as this corrupt, war-fighting military throughout the war, whereas a lot of things happened that were far away from American eyes that showed a lot of bravery by South Vietnamese. All right, we'll talk about this a little bit, all right? I gotta make sure I'm doing this thing right. So, who am I? These are some of the books I wrote. Sorry. So these are the books I wrote. This one is a military history of the last 2 years of the war, really focused on the South Vietnamese. This is a more recent one. This is a political, non-military history, the rise and fall of South Vietnam, focusing on going all the way from 1955 to 75. And this is just a compilation of things like self-published, all right? Now, when we talk about the North Vietnamese, they have published quite extensively on the war, including a lot of what we call in the history profession primary sources, which means original documents generated by the government, memoirs, things of that nature, telling their side of the stories, okay? Now, there's been a lot of publications by South Vietnamese also, but unfortunately they're much harder to find. And this is, I'm going to give the speech I give to every South Vietnamese audience I see. And that is for every veteran, no matter, and I use always the same cliche, even if you were a sergeant in the motor pool, write down your memoirs. Talk about what you did. Talk about the units. Because once you're gone, once the time is gone, it's gone forever. And that's when the communists will really have won the war, because they're publishing, okay? And they're publishing a lot of stuff. So some of this stuff, like for example, this is on the history of Cosman. This is a series of party documents they published. You can see volume 28. This is volume 12, to give you an idea. This is a book on the 1975 offensive. This is a history of the general staff, which you can see here, volume 5. So when I say to you that they are publishing extensively, believe me, and we use these books. All right, terminology. We're going to get a quick history lesson on terminology and geography. All right. First off, so there was never any such thing as the People's Liberation Armed Forces. All right. It was everybody was part of the People's Army of North Vietnam. They were just Southern forces down below the DMZ. All right. So when you often hear people talk about the VCPLF, it is a code phrase that talks about the Southern forces as opposed to what people consider the Northern forces, or what's called the NVA, right? They didn't see it that way. Their forces were broken into main forces, which are regular units, local forces, think of National Guard, and then guerrillas and militias, guys at the local, very local level, okay? Make sense so far? So the Army of the Republic of Vietnam, RVN, was the non-communist, the South Vietnamese Army. It is not the same thing as the Republic of so, this gets screwed up. So the Republic of Vietnam Armed Forces is everybody, all right? The Marines, the Navy, the Air Force, the regional forces, right? So often you hear that, now obviously the Army dominated the Republic of Vietnam Armed Forces, but they were just the Army, not the entire military, okay? regions or the names for the divisions of the geography, and the communists call it front. So you have 4 corps in South Vietnam, all right? Okay? So they run north to south. I Corps, 2 Corps, 3 Corps, 4 Corps, all right? So here's the DMZ, separating North Vietnam and South Vietnam. This is that long open flank I was telling you that buttresses Cambodia and Laos. Here's the East Sea, okay? So the communists had different stuff, right? They call them fronts, all right? So starting from, actually, this used to be the B5 front, but it changed to 2nd Corps in 73. So this is the B4 front, covers here. The well-known B1 front, which is often called MR5. B3, which is Central Highlands, and then B2, which is further broken up into different military regions, okay? So just understand that military divide a geography to assert command and control, all right? So each of these fronts is commanded by North Vietnamese general, just as the corps are commanded by South Vietnamese general officers, okay? So I want to talk a little bit about the background of the 75 offensive. So in 1965, Hanoi sent the 1st Division south, and the idea was, I'll have to go back for a second, they were going to come down here, and they were going to try and cut right across through the Central Highlands and cut South Vietnam in 2, and hence collapse the country and win the war. This is 1965, right? So that division came down the Ho Chi Minh Trail, attempted to do it, but it simply didn't have the combat power. The communists in the South simply didn't have the combat power to knock off South Vietnam. But when they did this, the Americans then began to bring in their own troops. Okay? So think of 60, their own direction, sorry. So in 68, the Tet Offensive hits, right? Then the communists launched their offensive at the cities, directed specifically at the South Vietnamese centers of power. The idea is they believe that there's going to be this massive uprising of the people because they hated the government so much. The South Vietnamese military would collapse because they had poor morale and they were puppets of the Americans, and they would basically take over the country, form a coalition government, kick out the Americans, and reunify the country, right? So remember that they are focused on the cities and on the South Vietnamese centers of government. So they were hoping for a general uprising, which did not happen. In fact, it didn't happen at all, which we won't go into politics. So then 72 happens, 71 happens, and this is very important. So the South Vietnamese military attacked into Laos to try and cut the Ho Chi Minh Trail, right? This is known as Lam Son 719. But what happens is there was no American advisors allowed into Laos. We got to send air power in, helicopters and stuff. They couldn't stay overnight. So the RVN attack, tried to attack down Route 9, got in very difficult terrain. And so the North Vietnamese managed to defeat the RVN incursion. And so because they had taken, the communists had taken such heavy losses in I'm skipping a little bit. They had taken such heavy losses in 68, they had pulled all their forces out of South Vietnam across the border. So for 69, 70, and into early 71, most of the North Vietnamese forces, communist forces, are moved across the borders into Cambodia and into Laos, right? So they are basically trying to rebuild their military in the South. So when the RVN attack Laos and their regular units defeat some of South Vietnam's best units, the airborne, the Marines, the Rangers, the 1st Division, Hanoi sees that as we have rebuilt our military, and it gives them the desire to go out and now launch the 72 offensive, okay? So keep this has major repercussions in mind that are going to happen again later. So then the 72 offensive happens, and again, remember the Tet Offensive against the cities, against the South Vietnamese, right? In the 72 offensive, because the North Vietnamese divisions are on the other side of the border, they have a longer way to go to get into South Vietnam, and they're attacking into the countryside, okay? Not against the cities, into the countryside. And because they had to launch their offensive from a further point out, Eventually, the South Vietnamese military and U.S. air power collectively slow them, stop them at Quang Tri, stop them at Kon Tum, stop them at An Loc, and turn the tide defensive. All right. But what then happens is the 73 Paris Accords happen, and that allows the North Vietnamese to keep their troops within South Vietnam. All right. So instead of now having to launch an offensive from further back, all right, they've now got troops and units much closer to the South Vietnamese centers of power. Follow me so far? All right, so the 72 offensive left, and the U.S. withdrawal left South Vietnam battered in the beginning. It had taken 1 million refugees. It had taken heavy casualties. A lot of the infrastructure had been built up in those areas was destroyed. Roads, bridges. They had and then U.S. withdrawal took out all the U.S. troops, took out a lot of which took out the firepower, which took out a lot of the economic support we had given them. So South Vietnam was then facing a badly weakened economy, 1 million refugees to deal with, and a bunch of other things. So, let me just skip through some of this. So, one of the things I want you to remember, especially young historians, is that economic factors play a very distinct role in the war, right? So, if you always think of the guy with the gun as issue number one, the economy is always issue 1A. And the reason for that is that inflation is hitting the South Vietnamese pocketbook very hard. Soldiers are having a hard time feeding their families. They're starving to death. There are U.S. aid cuts that impact their mobility and stuff. And so we'll talk about the U.S. aid cuts. So the U.S. Congress began cutting aid to South Vietnam for a variety of factors we won't get into. So fuel became very tight. Ammunition became even tighter. And so they continued to, and so what happens is it forced South Vietnamese forces to basically go on the defensive. They no longer were capable of offensive operations. They had to basically sit back. Alrighty, so starting in early 1974, the North Vietnamese have sort of kind of half rebuilt the losses they took in 72. So they go on the offensive. But they attack in 3 Corps, 2 Corps, and I Corps. They attack it sequentially, all right? Not at the same time, sequentially. So they launch first attacks in 3 Corps to ARV and beat them off. Then they launch attacks in 2 Corps in the summer of 74 to ARV and beat them off. Then they launch a massive assault up in I Corps. And the ARVN basically held, but it pushed their lines back. And this is what happened. And this is, I want you to think about 71 for a second. So the 304th Division comes in and near Da Nang, which I'll go to in a second, and they seize both this little district town in the middle of nowhere, Tung Duc, and Hill 1062. And so this puts Da Nang in reach of heavy artillery. So Lieutenant General Trung, who was the ARVN commander of I Corps, committed 2 airborne brigades to retake the town in the hill. I know this is hard to see. So there's very, very heavy fighting. And the airborne, which is considered the elite of the South Vietnamese military, eventually take the hill and hold it, but they can't take the town, right? And they take heavy casualties doing it. And so just as what happened in 71, when their regular units beat a South Vietnamese elite division, and they think that they're back, the same thing happens here. One of their regular units had beat 2 what they, in their mind, had beat 2 airborne brigades. They think they're back, and this pushes them to launch the 75 offensive. Yes. So then we have the communists attack Phuc Long province and capture it in January 75. And so now these are maps I'm going to show. Hard to see a little bit, but so basically now what's going to happen is in early March of 1975, the communists are going to launch their last offensive, but they're going to attack those 3 corps again, not sequentially, but all at the same time. And the idea is to tie the ARVN down, prevent them from being able to shift reserves, and burn up their supplies and cause casualties and hopefully create what they call an opportunity, which they're hoping the South Vietnamese will make a mistake that they can take advantage of. Okay? So this is I-4, this is Tum Duc right here. It's going to show you, you can see how close it is to Da Nang. The first attack happens, the opening attack happens in 2 corps, right? And the main objective of the attack is the town of Ban Mae Thuot in the southern part of the Central Highlands, right? And so I want you to understand something. So there's basically 3 roads, 4 roads if you count Route 1. And think of it as a rectangle, all right? So you've got Route 14 that goes Kon Tum, Pleiku, all the way down to Ban Mae Thuot. Then you've got Route 19 that goes from Pleiku, which is the capital of the Central Highlands, all the way out to Quy Nhon and Vinh Dinh. And then you've got Route 21 that cuts its way down here, right? So what the communists do is what's called in the military terminology, they isolate the battlefield, which means they cut the An Khê Pass here with the 3rd Division. They cut the Man Giang Pass here with a regiment. They cut Route 14 with a division. And they cut Route 21 with another regiment. So they've got roadblocks here, roadblocks here, roadblocks, roadblocks, roadblocks. So now they launch the attack on Ban Mae Thuot. There's no way to send reinforcements of Ban Mae Thuot by land, okay? Because the battlefield has been cut, the roads have been cut. So what they basically do is let me go back for a second. So what they have done is they have brought a division all the way out of North Vietnam, swung it all the way through the jungle to put it outside of here. They moved another division at Laos and put it here. They moved the division that was technically here and swung it all the way down here. So they're basically making a series of flanking movements designed to put their units to use the geography, the mountains and the jungle, to hide and move their units in. So what they do is they launch this attack on the morning of May 8th or 9th, and they basically use the 3 regiments, and this regiment, which they've also brought in from North Vietnam, which is considered one of their best units. They use another battalion here, so they've got 5-prong attacks. They scrape together every piece of armor they have, every tank, every APC that they have, break them up, they bring in sappers, and they basically just launch a massive assault on this town that's very thinly defended, right? Within hours, they've captured the city, right? So one of the things that I want to point out is when you often talk about the South Vietnamese, so there was, they try to land helicopters, 2 regiments, 23rd Division. The communists are waiting for them and run them off. But oddly enough, there's one battalion that is in its base camp that holds out for a week against repeated sapper attacks, tank attacks, artillery attacks. Of the 300 men that were in that battalion stronghold, they eventually retreat and break out and make it to the coast. The battalion commander, a guy named Bo An, and 27 men. So at the same time that's happening in 2 corps, something similar is happening up north, right? So again, the same kind of thing. They take the 324th Division, they swing it off the DMZ, they swing it all the way down and come into what's called the hill country south of Hue, okay? But north of the Hai Van Pass, which is a very distinct geographic feature between Hue and Da Nang, okay? So they swing the 324th Division, and they just launch multiple attacks on the RVN positions in the hill country. And the RVN held them off to the point where they now had to bring in a 2nd Division to come in, and what they then do is finally, they find a spot where there's a Ranger battalion. They launch an entire regiment against it, push the Rangers off, get all the way down, and they cut Route 1 between Hue and the Hai Van Pass, right? So now all these South Vietnamese units, which includes a large chunk of the Marine Division, a large chunk of the 1st Division, a Ranger group, RF groups, are trapped in a pocket here, okay? And so what happens is they attempt to break the roadblocks, they fail. The communists bring in more troops, expand their hold on Route 1, and now it's looking very difficult for this pocket. So General Trung decides to send ships up to try and pull these guys off like a Dunkirk, okay? And unfortunately, it falls completely apart. And in fact, the 147th Marine Brigade died on the beaches right here. So while that's happening, and you can see here's the Airborne Division, before that, I'll get to this in a second. Yeah, so this is the attack plan. But what happened was President Q had made two decisions. He asked General Trung to come back to Saigon. And he tells them, okay, of the 5 divisions you got up in I Corps, including the 2 General Reserve divisions, the Marines and the Airborne, I'm bringing the Airborne Division back to Saigon. That tears a huge gap in Trung's lines, all right? Now he no longer has any reserves. The second thing he does, as soon as Ban Me Tuot falls, he summons the commanding general of II Corps, a guy named Fu, to meet him in Cam Ranh Bay. And he tells Fu, he gives him we call in the military a mission order. He says to him, retake Ban Me Tuot. Doesn't tell him how, doesn't tell him what units to do, he just tells him you have to retake Ban Me Tuot. Now how is Fu going to do this if all the roads are blocked? Okay? So this is what I was talking about before. So this is the eventual cutting of Route 1 and trapping the most of the RVN in the pocket north of Way, and you see this movement here. So what happens is that Fu returns to his headquarters in Pleiku, and what he decides to do is, since all the roads are cut and he's got no air mobility, how is he going to retake Ban Me Tuot? So it makes one of the most illogical decisions of the war. He decides to gather up all of his troops and make a run down this road. It's called Route 7B, which from here to the little town of Chairea was decent, but once you get past it, nothing but a dirt road, and the bridges over the river are no longer viable. They're out there. So when he makes this move, what happens is basically all the people, all the soldiers, when they're told to leave, but all their families go with them. So suddenly there's thousands of civilians trying to follow the retreating column, right? And they get intermixed among the soldiers. Unit discipline starts to break down. And then what happens is, once the communists discover that Fu has made this move, they had already secretly moved a battalion right into this area. And the North Vietnamese commander tells that battalion commander, you get to here, I don't care what it takes or how long it costs, you get there as fast as possible. They made a forced march through the mountains at night and got to this area right here, this little pass, just as the South Vietnamese armor unit is moving through. And they're on a dirt road in the middle of the open, and the North Vietnamese just started hitting them with RPGs and everything. The armor brigade died here. Everybody backed up. There was a bunch of other rangers that had gotten through already. And so they cut the road here, and this is where the retreat on 7B begins to fall apart. Right? They're on this dirt road, and they're intermixed with all kinds of civilians. They get down to the bridge. The bridge is no longer there. They've got to put in a new bridge, which takes a lot longer than they thought it was over a pretty big river. Now the North Vietnamese are hot on their heels, following them, and very few guys make it to Tu Lo. So of the almost 20,000, if not more, South Vietnamese soldiers that began the march, about 1,000 make it to Tu Lo. All right. Now, having said that, what I think is one of the best examples of South Vietnamese bravery in the 75 offensive is that the 22nd Division, which held this area, okay, had attempted to break through the blockade at the An Khie Pass with 2 regiments. The 47th Regiment was up here, the 40th Regiment was down there. So they've got 2 regiments, the 41st and the 42nd. Once the order has been given for these guys to retreat, there's no longer any need for these guys to break the roadblock, right? So they're going to try and retreat back to defend Quy Nhon. But here's the problem. the communists start pressing on them with one regiment here, and they put up 3 roadblocks to cut them off here. They're cut off again too. But the RVN 22nd Division made one of the best fighting withdrawals of the war. They broke through 3 roadblocks. Okay? Kept their unit discipline, broke through 3 roadblocks, made it to the beaches of Queen, loaded on the Navy ships, and headed south. And then one of the regimental commanders goes back on the beach, he's the last guy off, goes back on the beach, and commits suicide. In the meantime, they're also trying to open up this road, but won't go with them. Oh, sorry. You guys following me so far? Okay, good. So, in 3 Corps, and again, this is another example of the great South Vietnamese bravery. So, on Lac, which they had held in 72, so they decided to retreat, and they retreated at night, the Rangers. Great movement, came down here to Chongtan, right? In a defensive area, right? There was a whole bunch of fighting in this area down here. And there is a very unique unit in the South Vietnamese military called the 3rd Armored Cavalry Brigade. Every corps had its own armored brigade. But Coy's unit was different. He actually modeled it on like U.S. cavalry, right? He actually created a combined arm, we call it combined arms thing. He had rangers, he had engineers, he had his guys working with his tanks, right? So he has to, the communists attack on 2 flanks, and Coy's unit in March just basically bounces back and forth from these 2 flanks, and quite frankly, impressive logistics and staff movement, and holds the whole area. So once that happens, they decide that we're going to come out this way, come out from this way. So they had to take this area first, right? So there's a reinforced ranger group holding it. Think of it as a regiment. And the entire NVA 9th Division attacks them with armor and artillery. They assault this thing 4 times. The Rangers threw them out in hand-to-hand fighting twice. Knocked out 15 tanks. And so badly damaged the NVA 9th Division, it was combat ineffective the rest of April. Then, because they cut the road here again, they made a night retreat again, and did. So, I want you to understand something. You can accomplish retreats if you plan for it, all right? Fu did not reposition supplies. He did not make a route recon. He did not make any effort to try and talk about, do something to the civilians. He just basically said, you gave me the order to retake Bambi to it, here's the only road open, got it, go. All right? Now we come to what people probably very well know, the very, very famous Battle of Sula in April with the RVN 18th Division against the entire Pavan 4 Corps. So General Dow, an old and dear friend of mine, knew that they were coming and suspected that they were going to repeat what they had done in 68. So Dow in February started doing a couple things. He cut his own ammunition rate, started secretly stockpiling his own ammunition, artillery ammunition, started secretly stockpiling food, right? He pre-registered, he had his artillery guy pre-register all his artillery pieces so that when they fired, they knew exactly where they were firing at. He built up defenses in the area. So on the morning of April 9th, the North Vietnamese attacked him with, even though it says 3 divisions, it's basically 7 regiments. So the 7th Regiment, which is the 7th Division, which is very well known, the 341st with 2 regiments, which had come from North Vietnam, they come all the way down from North Vietnam, and the 6th Division, which was a recently formed branch. But here's the problem. The 6th swung south with no opposition and cut Route 1 between Sun Lup and Bin Hoa. So now Dao is surrounded too, okay? But what happens is the North Vietnamese launch assault after assault after assault, and the 18th Division throws them back every time and causes such heavy casualties that they had to pull back for a couple days and sort of regroup, all right? So eventually what happens is, because he never clears this roadblock, And when I Corps fell and when II Corps fell, the North Vietnamese gathered everything they had into what they called the coastal column, 2,000 vehicles, and just started barreling south on Route 1. Okay, so the South Vietnamese headquarters sees this guy's coming, knows that he can't hold out against that, orders him to retreat. All right, because he's cut off here. And remember that 95B regiment that attacked Enemy 2, which I call one of the most elite regiments in the North Vietnamese Army? At this little battle right here, a company of Arvin dug into a hilltop, just the most northern positions that are attacked, from the regiment that's trying to hold this area. The 95B regiment assaults these guys. And they basically, same thing happened in Chongqing. They caused such heavy casualties to North Vietnamese, this 95B regiment was combat infected the rest of the month. So that was ordered to retreat. So where can he go? He can't go this way, right? So the only way he can go is this way. And so what he does is, again, he plans it, okay? He creates a total road march. He orders certain units to leave at certain times at night. And Dow, in the epitome of leadership, leads the troops on foot all the way south and breaks out, all right? And rescues his division plus the 1st Airborne Brigade and a bunch of other guys, and then comes back and puts his unit right here to defend after that, okay? I know I'm going very quickly and I know I'm covering a lot of ground, but I'm trying to give you guys a flavor of what's happening. So now we come to the final battle of Saigon. So you've got the 18th defending over here, the 5th Division over here, 25th Division, whatever they could scrape together from the units that have 1st Corps and 2 Corps were holding the South. And so the North Vietnamese, to their credit, have done one of the most amazing logistics feats of the war. They've basically taken their entire army, except for one division, all the air defense units, and every piece of rolling stock they've got, and sent it south, right? And they now have more troops in South Vietnam than the Americans had at one point in the war. They have almost 600,000 troops, 587,000, I think is the correct number. And they've got, I can't remember the exact number on Saigon, but it's well up in the 200,000. Plus a whole bunch of air defense. So what they basically do is they use this division to cut here. They come in. They're basically launching a massive, again, 5 assault columns into Saigon, right? And there's a saying that if you read in the communist histories, you will know that they very, very rarely say anything nice about the South Vietnamese. But there's a comment by the 2nd Corps Division Commander, because a huge battle erupts here at the Army School, a massive battle, where the Arvin hold pretty well and really cause heavy casualties to the North Vietnamese. And the guy who was the deputy commander of that battle said that those who say we took Saigon without breaking a light bulb should pick up a shovel and help bury our dead. So there's fierce battles break out at Tan Son Nhut, but the 5th Division's cut off, the 25th Division's overrun. A couple of these Ranger groups, the 22nd Division, remember those guys I talked about, had regrouped. They were down here holding these guys off, but they just overwhelmed them. And by the morning of April 30th, they were poised right on the outskirts of the city. And General Yuen Bang Min had taken over the government, and he just announced a surrender on the radio because South Vietnam had barely 24 hours left. All right? That is a very, very high-level overview of what happened. But I wanted to tell you to take a look at it not just from what happened in 75, but there was similarities and not similarities. What happened in 65, 68, 72, and a series of basically the North Vietnamese, again, you have to give them credit, had done incredible planning on this, and they had learned the lessons of the 72 offensive. They had learned to attack in what's called combined arms. So they were no longer launching armor without infantry or air defense or engineers. And those armor columns got slaughtered in 72 by U.S. air power and South Vietnamese air power. So they had learned to fight in combined arms. They had planned for this heavily. They started planning for it actually at the end of March of 1973. And they were looking for that opportunity, hoping South Vietnam would make a mistake, and that the mistake that was made was food trying to come down that road. And once that happened, once all of 2 Corps was collapsing, they were able to take advantage, right? South Vietnamese morale collapsed, the defenses collapsed, and that's why the country fell so quickly, not because the army weren't willing to fight, but because of command mistakes, all right? So, 2 o'clock, you good?
Any questions we have?
Thank you, Professor Veith, for a very detailed description of the last 50 days of the Vietnam War. We call it the broken March with the broken gun and Black April. And I hope you guys
Jesus Christ.
understood some of that. But for me, as a military person, I love the detail. I love the way you remember all the little battles and where the attacks were.
Got Q&A just in case they want to ask questions from online.
Are you going to make a revision of the book? Are you going to make a revision of the book as you discover more information?
Nothing has come out since I published Black April 12 years ago, 13 years ago now, has changed any of that.
Oh, okay. Anyway, just want you to know that according to Dr. Veith, the South Vietnamese Army, your grandfather fought very well. Okay, and we lost the war under the circumstances because we had cut the military from Allied and the United States. We didn't have enough ammunition, enough parts, enough fuel, and also very important, we lacked American bombing that helped us win all the battle in 1972. So on the ground, we didn't have enough fuel, didn't have enough ammunition, and on the air, we didn't have the air support. That's why it happened as it happened.
Don't think that there was no ammunition and no fuel. They were just not in the quantity that they had had.
Right. And they said a general division, they were only allow like 3 artillery shells a day. I mean, you shoot three shots, that's it. No. And that's very hard to do when you're surrounded by 4 different North Vietnamese divisions. I have a question. With all these kind of theoretical questions, with all these North Vietnamese Army division attacking the South, how many South Vietnamese division would it take to make sort of like a incursion into the North this time and go march all the way to the North?
Are you asking me a question?
Yeah, just a theoretical question.
There was the South Vietnamese military was not capable of launching a ground air offensive into North Vietnam at any point in the time. Simply didn't have the manpower, didn't have the training, didn't have the ability to coordinate across different branches, air. I mean, it would take a level of sophistication that they had not achieved yet to do something like that. Exactly.
So they did try the limestone now incursion, but that was very good.
Well, yes, and I also had done Cambodia the year before, which has been quite successful. But again, back to geography, in the Cambodian area is a heck of a lot different geographically than Laos. Plus, there was also much closer to North Vietnam. It was right in the heart of the Ho Chi Minh Trail. It had built-up defenses. It had anti-aircraft everywhere. It had armor. So they're attacking into different areas, and Cambodia had American advisors with them and American troops going in there with them, whereas Laos lent on 17 they had used.
And in 1975, we have either American support or American troops on the ground to support such incursion. It did happen. You guys know about the Ukraine war and the incursion when the Ukrainians actually attacked Russia to divert the attack on the eastern flank of Ukraine.
Yes, ma'am.
I was wondering, because you said that the retaking of Mexico and then the subsequent retreat, the attempt to retake Mexico,
Yes.
and then the subsequent retreat was a manifestation of maybe
To go over to the Corps commanders and bypassing their dad, yes, exactly.
So my question is, what could have been done differently with 2020 hindsight? So if he had been given the order to retake it, what would have been another way that might have turned out differently?
That's a great question, and one I've actually wrestled with myself. So what are Fu's options? Well, he could try and just say, bend into it, lost, we can't retake it, I can't break the roadblocks. Even though the JGS already believed that 2 Corps was going to be the first part of the offensive, and they had moved supplies, they had repositioned supplies into Pleiku to provide 60 days worth of ammunition and food in case they were cut off. So food had plenty of food, plenty of ammunition to stay in the bunkers. But boundary to it had always been considered like a pin, right? It's very easy to go south in Saigon, it's easy to go to the coast, and that was made a kind of a strategic position. And I think it also held psychological stuff for Teal. I mean, they had just lost a major city, and he didn't want the communists to be able to say that. So that's kind of the basis for it. So what are Fu's options? He can stay there. He could have tried, his only other option would have been to try and go straight down Route 414, try to break through the 320 division and come at it that way. We're in the counterfactuals now. It's kind of hard to say what would happen, but that probably, in my opinion, short of not launching an attack, letting the communists come to him where his defenses are ready, that was probably the next best option.
I'm sorry, I think I misunderstood the first part of the answer. Are you saying that the retaking of Manitoba was more of a psychological issue than a necessary military issue?
Correct. That's on 2, not on 4. All right. I mean, Fu could have obviously sat there and said, "We can't." He could have pushed back on 2 and said, "We can't retake. We're just Route 14, Route 19 is cut. Where am I going to go?"
Just a quick follow-up.
Sure.
Why was it not foreseeable to the south that the attack would come from Route 1? I mean, was it a total surprise, or could it have been anticipated?
No, they South Vietnamese intelligence, and Frank can certainly talk about this also. American intelligence said, listen. Well, so Fu's intelligence officer told him the communists are going to attack Pleiku. He didn't believe it. He believed they were attacking in Pleiku. Right? That was his headquarters. That's where he thought the communists were going to attack. That's why he did reinforce that into a little bit. He sent the 21st Ranger Group down there, but he did not attempt to. And this is the important. A couple of days beforehand, North Vietnamese lieutenant, one of those 316 guys coming down, swung south, had dropped his diary, and it was recovered 2 days before the attack. And it says in the diary, "On our way to Monday to it." So they had intelligence indicators that the communists were going to attack Monday to it, but Fu didn't believe it. They wouldn't accept it. Frank, you want to make any comments on this? I know you want to, Frank, so.
In case you don't know, what's left of me survived all the last years of the war. I arrived in 1969. I was one of the last people to come off the roof of the U.S. Embassy. I was the CIA's senior intelligence analyst in Saigon during that period. And I can tell you, number one, there are 2 things. I mean, Jay covered the known facts as we have them now. But in real time, folks, we didn't know all that you've seen on these diagrams. In fact, history has sharpened the details And in some of them, they've been rewritten. The North Vietnamese have rewritten the history of the war, and so have South Vietnamese authorities. Basically, number one, you have to realize, you look at this, you guys, and keep one thing in mind if you're trying to figure out why South Vietnam lost and why the dynamics were so significantly different as time went on. First, demographics. 15% of the population of South Vietnam in 1960 lived near urban areas. In 1974, it was about 45%. What that meant in terms of security is that more and more South Vietnamese, for a variety of reasons, were living in and around protected and secure areas. So that changed the character of the war. Secondly, 1968 was a terrible defeat for the communists. They lost half and more of their forces in the South, and they never recovered, to the extent that they had to give up the idea of winning hearts and minds in the South in the war that way. Gone was the idea of a general uprising. Never happened. 1972 represented the first real change in North Vietnamese ideology about waging war. And that meant that they would concentrate on using main forces against main forces. There was no longer an idea of mobilizing the population. During the last days of the war, the most salient fact that any outsider needs to understand is that as of mid-March, South Vietnam's command and control system had totally collapsed. There were no orders going out that anyone could be sure would be followed. President Thieu changed his mind several times, and this was the critical reason for the collapse. He kept changing his mind. He gave wrong signal to Phu, and Phu wasn't really going to get down and recapture Nam Tut. He was told to abandon the highlands. That opened up the entire northern part of the country to more and more infiltration and what have you. It was a total change in the nature of the war. And Phu abandoned the highlands precipitously, and basically his army collapsed. President Thieu, meeting with him in Cam Ranh, didn't say, go take Nam Tut. He said, get the hell out of the highlands, period. And he didn't give any further orders or support to him. So the collapse of the South Vietnamese command really began at that point and never, ever recovered. One other dimension, which is really important to know about, is that we had intelligence, and the enemy had intelligence. Our intelligence was impeccable, was absolutely sensational. We had a spy planted inside the Communist command. The Communists, after the war, have conceded this spy stole every one of the Communist command secret from 1965 to the end. I met with him 10 days before the end of the war, and he predicted exactly how the Communists were going to see Saigon. What does that mean? It means that the South Vietnamese had incredibly good intelligence on the enemy. The enemy didn't have such good intelligence, but they did score one big one, which affected the entire picture that Jay has been talking about. In December of 1974, President Thieu held a meeting in Saigon with his commanders, predicting what would happen in the next dry season offensive. And he reckoned that the Communists would concentrate on Saigon, not so much in the northern highlands. And he began planning accordingly. Somebody inside Thieu's cabinet was a communist spy. We think we know who it was. And it wasn't Pham Xuan An, by the way, despite what all the mythology teaches. That spy made clear to General Zhang, the commander-in-chief, what the South Vietnamese expected. And they changed their plans accordingly. First, one of the things you didn't mention was the communist operation January 1975. The communists seized Fujian province, just north of Saigon. It was a testing operation to see if the Americans would re-enter the war, send their B-52s. President Chu saw it as a similar test. The communists seized Fujian. This was before Ban took. There was no reaction from the United States. This single event convinced Hanoi the road to Saigon was open, and they were able to concentrate and maneuver their forces accordingly. President Chu didn't reinforce Fujian, as he did not reinforce the Highlands, as he did not reinforce Ban Tut, because he kept waiting for a signal from the United States that we were going to re-enter the war and save him. He kept waiting. He left the Americans in the dark about his decision to tell President Fu to withdraw from the Highlands. He left the American embassy in the dark because he was hoping that American officials would be captured in Pleiku and Khartoum, and that would cause the Ford administration to reintroduce American forces. So all of this stuff, and I tell you this, is much more than you could ever absorb, but it's happening just below the surface. It's outside of the diagrams that you're seeing here. This is what really set up the collapse. The 18th Army Division was sensational. They fought, just as you pointed out, at Xuan Long. Okay, at Xuan Long. But the point is, once Xuan Long was lost, it was over. The road really was 40 miles north of Saigon, and the war was done. The reason I've taken so much of your time, because I totally respect what he's told you, but there is a subterranean part of this story that really explains what happened. And I've just taken much more of my time.
Thank you, Mr. Snap. We're definitely going to invite you back for your own lecture. That's another lecture right there. It's wonderful to hear all this information from your point of view, the CIA point of view. So that just answered my question that President Xi planned to pull back from the Central Island to defend the coastal city would not have worked because of total breakdown of communication between Phil and all the general Gu and the Highlands and Chung and the Region 1.
Can I have another question?
He was giving this signal whether to defend Da Nang or Hue or to withdraw, and General Chung pulled out of Hue and was supposed to come back and try to take Hue. It was too late. And it's
Can I have a question?
breakdown communication. Thank you very much. Any question?
Yeah.
Who was the spy? That is not what you wanted. You didn't name the spy, you left us hanging. He said it was not
The spy's name was Vo Van Ba. He was one of the great heroes of the South Vietnamese cause.
No. She's asking about the cabinet guy.
Oh, the cabinet guy. We don't know. There is speculation. The North Vietnamese security people published a history of the end of the war in which they suggest it was a code clerk.
Is that the guy that was the
That's the
leader?
guy. That was the guy who started the guys off.
Yeah. It was a code clerk, but we're not sure. It may well have been also there was a plan inside the Military Intelligence Security Service, and the CIA knew of him. We let him stay in place because we helped promote him initially, and it was embarrassing to admit maybe we pushed a bad
You
apple.
have to tell me who that guy is, because I've heard that story a dozen times. I don't know who it is.
Well, I was there, and I can tell you that was what we thought.
Next question?
Yeah.
Can I put the,
Here.
The Vietnamese